Hello and welcome to the 40th episode of Coffee and Cocktails. I'm your host, Dr. Ann Wand, and welcome to our series, Giving Voice to the Voiceless, where today we have the pleasure of having at our studio again, Sonia Gulzab Abbasi, lecturer at Comstock University in Islamabad, Pakistan, as well as anthropology student at SOAS in London. If some of you remember, she spoke with us in our last season for episode 34, and if you get a chance, please check it out. This season, she's going to be talking to us about something different and rather important regarding Pakistan's identity crisis. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity again.
Of course. As per usual, we'll start off by having you tell us what drink you were having for the show, followed by a little bit about yourself. Sonia, would you like to start?
Yes, I'm having coffee.
It's a pretty mug. I like that.
It's a beautiful day today in UK. So I'm enjoying the weather and I'm very excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, well, I am as well. I have to say for the listeners, so I am, very new to this topic. And, every episode I try to prep as well as I can, but there are going to be some topics that are going to require more work than others. This, I think, was one of those topics, but it was really interesting. I mean, one thing I'll say as a Westerner, and I'll know that we'll talk about this through the course of the episode, is we know very, very little about Pakistan, like verging on nothing. And some of the articles that you sent me for me to read talk about how basically the only things that get infiltrated into the West are terrorism, Malala surviving a gunshot wound, women's rights being infringed upon. And it makes it seem like it's this horrible place. And what I'm learning in having talked with you and having read this material is that it actually is a wonderful place. Sounds like the cuisine is fantastic from what I've been reading, but that there is so much more to the country in terms of its mixed ethnicities, religions, etc. But within that, there's a lot of complication in terms of what it means to be Pakistani today. So if we could, I'd like to start off with our first question and have us sort of open up with this idea of what does it mean to be Pakistani and why is that a question that is so hard to answer?
All right. Thank you for a very interesting introduction. And it's a very interesting question as well, like what it means to be a Pakistani. There's not a simple answer to it because I'll come to my personal opinion about what it means to be a Pakistani. But first, I'll just talk about that on a general, on a perspective that what it means to be a Pakistani for all of the Pakistanis, right? So we'll go back to the history that we have multiple identities, right? We are known as the child of the empire because we are a post-colonial state.
Are we talking about the Ottoman Empire, though?
Yes, we have
Ottoman, post-colonial, etc.
Yes, the Mughal Empire, the British Empire, and then
a lot of empires. You're a child of a lot of empires.
Exactly. So we are known as the child of the empire because we are a post-colonial state, and then we are known as Muslim Pakistani because Pakistan and India, they parted their ways on the basis of the linguistic and religious lines, right? And then we have a lot of regional identities as well. Like there are so many different regional identities, ethnic minorities known as Pakhtun, Baloch, Sindhi. So, when someone asks that what it means to be a Pakistani, there's not a simple, concrete answer. There's not a monolithic answer to it. So we have been through so much history. And then, we have a South Asian identity attached to it as well. Pakistani, South Asian, Muslim identity, and then the regional identities in their role as well.
And if I could just give the listeners sort of like a comparison point, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Some of our listeners come from America. So I'll be using this as an example, and probably Italy, just from personal understandings. So if we think about it from the U.S. context, and then somebody were to say, what does it mean to be American? I mean, sometimes I think of like terrible, like stereotypes like hamburgers and guns and toting the American flag like a weirdo. But if you really think about it in a serious sense, that concept of a melting pot, or more accurately, a stew, where you have pockets of people who have their own sense of identity, and it might be different in some remote part of Wisconsin as opposed to somebody who might have historical roots that come from another country and maybe they're first or second generation, or they're Native American, for example. So I think in that context, what it means to air quote be American is going to be very different from person to person. Same if you were from Italy. People from the South have a very different series of identifiers as opposed to people in the North. And then even then, the local identity is going to be extremely different than the supposed national identity. Would you say that that's accurate for Pakistan as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. Pakistani state tried to, create a monolithic identity of Pakistan. When Pakistan came into being, when Pakistan idea was conceived, like I told you, that it was based on the two-nation theory, that Pakistanis have a different culture, have a different religion. So they needed a separate land from the Hindus residing in India. And then Pakistan idea came into being and executed that, we cannot live with Hindus, we cannot practice our religion there. So this is the state. Monolithic identity was imposed by the state at the expense of the other, identities. So, till date, the state is trying to create this, that we have one nation, one language, one religion, one culture, which is not helping at all. Because like I told you, that Pakistan has a beautiful cultural diversity, where there are Pakhtun, there are Balots, there are Hazara people, there are Pathans.
They're right? Bahari like yourself, correct?
They're Bahari, right. Absolutely, like myself. So, right now I'm giving you a general view of the identity, what Pakistani means for the most Pakistani. But for personally me, whenever I try to, I'm sort of stuck up in identity crisis, I go back to my childhood, which I spent in a mountainous village the time spent with my grandmother. And that idea of who I am was quite different from what Pakistani state tried to impose on us. Sure. Because the idea which I got from my family was very multicultural. Because my grandmother, she used to narrate us stories of the partition, pre-partition era, where Hindu, Muslim, and Sikhs were living together in harmony. And she even used to tell us that we had really good, shopkeepers who were Hindus and Sikhs, and they were really nice people. And then, she was not very well-read woman, but she was very intelligent. And she knew that, British came and they sort of created this rift between Hindus and Muslims, and we parted our ways.
Interesting.
She was aware of the colonial, the remnants and the colonial hangover which people had till date. So, whenever I'm, like I said, that before I went to the school and before the state curriculum, tried to infuse this monolithic identity in me, I was raised very multicultural, I was taught to be, very tolerant towards other religion and to, diversity, because like I told you that my grandmother, who I spent a lot of time with, my paternal grandmother, she was from the pre-partition era when India and Pakistan were together.
Okay. So,
I think the state, the identity which state tried to, inculcate in us, that was, I think, very sort of a shallow, which couldn't, help to shape my identity. I get back to my childhood to sort of get back to my.
And if we could expand on that in terms of the state imposition of what identity should be as opposed to what it actually is. You've said that identity formation in Pakistan involves including some identities while excluding others. Could you explain to our listeners what are quote unquote accepted forms of Pakistani identity and what are not, and what the reasons are for this?
Absolutely. Again, a very interesting question and very pertaining. I'll just give you an example that, in order to conceive this idea of creating one nation under one flag, one religion, and one language, Pakistan even lost a part of it, which is now present day known as Bangladesh. So Bangladesh was part of Pakistan after partition. And, one of the biggest factors which led to the division of Bangladesh from Pakistan was that Bangladeshi people wanted Bengali to be their official language as well. But Pakistani state was adamant that Urdu is the only official, the national language of Pakistan. So on that basis, we lost a part of Pakistan, which is now known as Bangladesh.
Interesting.
And the Pakistani state never learned their lessons from the history. And that sort of a medium of, operating that strategy is still intact because, there are a lot of minority ethnic backgrounds like Balochis and Pakhtuns. They have a lot of grievances against the Pakistani state because of this exactly reason, right? And I think that Pakistani state failed to, find strength in their diversity. The other way around, There are so many divisions, like I told you, that the Balochis, they have a strong grievances against Pakistani state, that they don't accept our identities as Balochi, right? And again, the Pakhtuns have their own grievances against Pakistani state as well.
Interesting.
And the fact that Pakistani, on the basis of the language, and in order to, achieve this grand narrative of Pakistan, that Pakistan will have only, Urdu as its national language. And by the way, English and Urdu is the official language of Pakistan. The irony that, like there's a saying that my colonizer language is stronger than my own language, my regional language. So English was imposed to us during the British era, when the British came to subcontinent and, India, and they, ruled over us. And they sort of try to obliterate the regional languages, right? And they created that Urdu in, I think, 1837. They declared Urdu as the national language of India and Hindustan, right? So Urdu is also, in certain terms, it's a colonial construct, because there were so many Sanskrit and Persian and Arabic. There were so many diverse languages spoken before British came here in India and subcontinent.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's always a historical root to it, what is happening nowadays in Pakistan. And everything is tied to that colonial past which we had.
If we could expand on that as well, this idea of English and English being imposed on you in the school system. You said that growing up, English was quote unquote forced down your throat. What effects do you think this had not only on your psyche and therefore your identity, but also those of your peers?
Again, it's a very sort of a intricate question, but again, it is part of my identity as well. For instance, I'll just try to give you an example that when I was in my undergraduate studies, I could not even speak a single word of English. And our university, it was compulsory to speak in English, to give presentation in English. There were certain professors which would give us this option that, okay, fine, you can also speak in English, but try to give your presentation in English.
Oh, you mean you could also speak in Urdu, but
like English and Urdu is the official language of Pakistan, by the way. Urdu is the national language, but English is one of the official languages.
But they gave you the option to do both, correct?
Yeah, but most of the professor would prefer, because our university was the English medium university. And, I used to struggle a lot, and, I had great ideas to talk about, and, English would bear me from speaking my mind. Because like I told you that I think in my regional language, which is Pahari, the language of mountains. And then I have to translate that thought into Urdu, and then I have to translate that thought into English before I speak it, right? So I would just like to, recite some sort of words by Bill Fena. You speak good English, right? Do you know how many nights I have spent twisting your English off my tongue? I do not take pride in your English. I want to stumble on my words. I want to speak with an accent so thick that it requires silence. I want you to struggle to understand me. Realize your English is not superior. Your English does not equate intelligence. Do not compliment me on how well I have accepted colonization. I do not want your pat on the back. I was forced to learn this language. I did not choose to. Your English disconnects me from my own people. I'm deaf to my own sacred language because of your English. Your English has done nothing for me. It's a beautiful word by Bill Fena. You speak good, by the name of You Speak Good English. Wow. In Pakistan, intelligence is equated with how good English you speak. And when I grew up, I would admit that, even I accepted this belief that, oh my God, if he's a good English speaker, he's very intelligent. And trust me, it took me years to deconstruct it. It took me years to unlearn this. And obviously that sort of a rub on me as well, this belief. And there was a point that, when I started practicing speaking English in front of mirror, and it was that when I graduated from my university. And when I started, doing my MPhil, and I started working as well as a lecturer. I used to practice, and I used to feel guilty for not speaking good English.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many, like I told you, there's so many beautiful cultural regional languages, and there's so many beautiful poetry written in Sindhi, Punjabi, Balochi, and in my own language, which I could not, when I try to translate it into English, it completely destroys the meaning of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned this. So when I was writing my doctoral thesis and then my book, one of the chapters, because I, as you know, I work on language identity. And one of the big things I talk about is why people find it so difficult to learn another language. And I have a whole chapter where I focus on, why do we learn another language? And one of the elements that comes up through that discussion later on in the book is this idea of language learning blocks. And colonialism is a component of that, in that instead of instilling the love of a language that you learn through choice or desire, the fact that it's pushed onto people could actually prevent them psychologically from being able to move on in that language. So case in point, where I lived in northern Italy and South Tyrol is predominantly German speaking. So 70% German speaking, 26% Italian speaking, and then 4% Latin speaking. And they're a mountain community, and that is their language. There was an instance where I did an interview with a German-speaking teacher who speaks English. Interestingly, English is quite neutral because it doesn't have the colonial elements to it. It's seen more as a global language that'll help you get a job. So it's different in that sense. But anyway, she worked at the trilingual university, Free University of Bolzano. And she was telling me about how the German and Italian speakers, as part of their requirements, have to take courses in each other's language. But because they've been trained since they were little to, basically Italian speakers go to the Italian speaking school system and the German speakers go to the German speaking school system, even though they are technically learning each other's language, mentally, there's this barrier because they go to one school, German speakers go to another. If they're in the same building, they go in through different entrances. Playgrounds are segregated. Lunchtimes are segregated because the German speakers want to make sure that their German language is quote unquote pure. So basically this is being fed into their head. So now they get to university where they are expected to speak in the other person's language, but subliminally they've been trained that it's almost like an other. And if you learn too much of the other, then it's going to take away your own identity. So she gave this example of a German speaking student who was supposed to give a presentation in Italian, and she just froze and started crying. And it didn't matter that she'd technically been taking Italian lessons since she was little. This barrier had been in her head for so long. And even though she needed to be able to do this in order to get a decent grade, she just completely cracked. But because that teacher had been through the system herself, she understood it. And it seems to me that this doesn't only pertain to that area, but that there's a lot of similarities in that if a language is being introduced in a negative way or as a result of negative history, which is the case of South Tyrol, it's unrealistic to assume that people are going to embrace it and accept it in a positive way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I have gone through your research and it was very interesting. And going through your research, basically, it created an idea in my head that I wanted to talk. It resonated so much with me. It was so relatable that going through your book that I said, oh my God, I need to talk about my Pakistani identity as well. And thank you for writing that. And, it's very interesting and it's a great piece of work you did. And, like you said, that in terms of opportunities, and I know so many people who are not very good with English, and then they couldn't get the opportunities which they would have, And then the fact that, English and Urdu was introduced by the British in the subcontinent, the rest of the regional languages were blurred. They were literally systematically destroyed. And in some, books, I don't know the reference, but I heard that these Britishers, when they took over India, they used to destroy the regional literature. They would translate it into English, and then they would destroy that literature. Like I said, there's so much wisdom, in the regional scripts of Punjabi and Sindhi and Pashto scripts, which are the regional languages of Pakistan, and even India. India had a lot of rich history as well. So when you are trying to destroy a language, you are destroying a whole culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would like to,
go on.
I would just like to, narrate another couplet, which was very interesting, sort of a poetry from Shailja Patel. She talks about the diversity we Indians and Pakistani have in terms of language and culture, and how, it was restricted to one language, which is English, right? So I'm going to narrate it. Listen, my father speaks Urdu, language of dancing peacocks, rosewater fountains, even its curses are beautiful. He speaks Hindi, saw and melodic, earthy Punjabi, salty rich as saag paneer. So she's giving a metaphor of saag paneer is a cuisine in India and Pakistan.
It's really delicious.
You have tried it?
It's one of my favorite saag paneer. Yeah.
That's so amazing.
Yeah.
Sawali laced with Arabic. He speaks Gujarati, solid ancestral pride. 5 languages, 5 different worlds. Yet English shrinks him down before white men.
Yeah.
And so many times when, from my personal experience, and when I came to London in 2018 as a visiting research fellow at SOAS, that was the time when I started exploring my identity. Because, people would ask me, are you Indian? I'm like, no, I'm Pakistani. Oh, you don't look like Pakistani. I was like, okay. And then, when I would, converse with him in English, and they would say, how could you speak that much good English? No, you're not Pakistani. Trust me, quote and unquote. These were the words of the people I interacted with, not from the academia, but the people outside academia. They will literally ask me that, how could you speak so much good English? And then, I would tell them that we are a post-colonial state where British ruled for years and they imposed this language on us. And then I would tell them that I don't feel pride in speaking English because it was forced upon me. But obviously, there are, other aspect to it as well, that English is an international language. It is good to have a command over, having an English language. But the point here is that you should not impose one language and then try to, destroy the rest of the regional languages.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the main argument here.
Yeah, absolutely. You sent me an article from the late Pakistani columnist Irfan Hussain. I hope I'm saying his name right. And in his article, he said, since partition, and that would be the partition between India and Pakistan, Pakistan has been locked in an identity crisis as the state seeks to find its place in the world. Why do you think this is?
All right. So, in order to answer that, I just want to give an idea about a Pakistani state. For instance, Pakistan is a post-colonial garrison state, which means that Pakistan only survives when there is a global war going on, right? For instance, in 1960s, 1970 Afghan War, and then after 9/11, Pakistan was a military ally of the US. During the Afghan War, Pakistan helped Mujahideens to expel Russian influence from Afghanistan. And, the US, along with the help of Pakistani military, they literally strengthened Mujahideen, right? During the Afghan War to expel Russian, the US wanted to contain its power in this region. Okay. And then after 9/11, Pakistan became an official military ally of US war on terror. And Pakistani gave their bases to US, right? Mm-hmm. So now coming back to your question, like I said, that Pakistan was part of India before partition, right? And then after Pakistan came into being, Pakistan was a very weak state, because most of the industry was based in Bombay or Calcutta, right? Mm. And Pakistan was militarily and in terms of industry, Pakistan was very feeble, right? So Pakistani needed support of a capitalist center. And then at that time, America was showing a lot of interest in this region because of, the Cold War era, the ideological war between Russia and US, right? And then US came to our support, right? So Pakistan's whole economic structure was built on the military aid by the US. And the part of the aid comes from the Saudi as well, right? Mm-hmm. So in terms of all this geostrategic sort of a power game going on between the superpowers, right? Pakistan was born, right? Pakistan got strength. It got a lot of money from US, right? And a lot of curriculum in Pakistan is very West-centric. When I started teaching Pakistan studies in a public sector university, and there was no mention of our colonial past, there was no mention of how the British came here. Interesting. The Pakistan studies curriculum, which was given to me, and I sort of innovated it, and I, created my own curriculum where I taught students about their colonial past as well, right? It was not part of the curriculum which was given to me by the public sector because I was teaching in a public sector university, right? So the idea of Pakistan, that Pakistan is still trying to find its place in the world. Like I told you that there's a lot of Western influence in Pakistan because we were literally, we got our place in the world because of the military aid by the US. Because all the factories were based in Calcutta and India, and Pakistan was very weak economically. It needed a capitalist center. So, we have a chunk of identities coming from India. And then we have a chunk of identity coming from West, because West invested a lot of money in Pakistan. And, there's a British education system, OA levels, all the O-level exams are conducted by the British Council till date, right? We don't have any our own state machinery which could, sort of take these exams, O-levels and A-levels exams, right? So, Pakistan is finding its identity engrossed in all of these identities which are coming through Saudi, because Saudi Arabia gives a lot of aid to Pakistan as well on the basis of Muslim brotherhood. And then, like I told you, that we were the American ally, military ally in this region. So there's a lot of Western influence. And then we had a history as well, South Asian history, rich history. So, in between all this, that Pakistan had to survive because, we have perceived threat from India as well, because India is our official enemy, by the way, right? Because of the dispute in Kashmir, right? What is happening in Kashmir, right? So Pakistan has a perceived threat from India and Pakistan has a perceived from Afghanistan. So in order to survive, Pakistan took a lot of help from US, Saudi. So in between all these, fight for survival, Pakistani identity is lost under.
Do you think, if we could take that step further, this idea of a lost identity and feeling torn between whether or not they associate with Afghanistan, whether or not they associate with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, which we'll talk about in a second, or in response to their relationship with India. Do you think all of these elements explain why there's an emphasis by the Pakistani establishment, or it's also called military and political elite, to define Pakistan as an Islamic state despite its historical ties to India, as well as having numerous members of society from various ethnic and religious backgrounds?
Again, very interesting question and very relevant. I think for that we need to go back to the history. When Hindus and Muslims were living together in India, there was an idea put forth by the Muslim thinkers that Muslims in India are not living in peace, right? And they proposed this idea of two-nation theory, that we have a different culture, we have a different religion, so we should have a separate homeland. And then the idea of Pakistan was executed by the idea was conceived by Allama Iqbal, which is the national poet of Pakistan, and then Quaid-e-Azam. And then Pakistan came into being. And, most of the Pakistani says that, the two-nation theory was good because you see what is happening with Muslims in Modi's India. Even in India was a secular state, but now the present government, which is Modi, they are trying to create a Hindu Rashtra. They want to make India a Hindu nation, right? So the idea put forward by the military has a historical root to it. Because when Pakistan came into being, the founders of the Pakistan proposed this idea that we needed a one nation under one religion and one language and Muslim country. We needed a Muslim country, right? And that idea is coming from that history when Pakistan came into being, right? And what military did was that military literally created our curriculum for their own control in this region. Because, like I said, that military sort of created this perceived threat of India, right? And, this Kashmir issue is basically a sort of it's basically a mode of money for the military, right? Because, in order to profit, they wanted to keep this conflict alive, right? This Kashmir issue between India and Pakistan. So military sort of, with the help of the Pakistani state, they created our curriculum as well, where they posed India as a threat to Pakistan in order to control, right? And then they created this hyper-nationalized Muslim state, which they portrayed military as the military of the Muslim, as the army of the Muslim Ummah, right?
Okay.
And this is how the, identity was created. And, even I grew up, I'll accept that I was very hyper nationalistic, approach I had towards that, India is our enemy, and then Pakistani army is the, sort of a savior of the Muslim Ummah. It is the military. But when I grew up and, when I graduated, nobody, in my entire school and my university and college, none of our teachers or curriculum talk about this, that the identity bubble or the identity which was created by the state is not my identity. And then when I graduated and I started studying, I graduated in bioinformatics, and then I started studying literature, and I was like that the history and the, sort of the identity which was created by the state and the military was completely wrong. It was just to benefit them.
It does seem like, and again, correct me if you think this interpretation is inaccurate, but one thing I noticed in my own research with conservative German-speaking parties, and it's something that came up in conversations that I had with individuals during my fieldwork research, is that they needed to have an other. There needed to be an opposing group in order for their identity to be valid. And I wonder if in the case of the quote unquote establishment, they needed, that other had to be India, and without it, they couldn't really justify the objectives that they were trying to create in terms of fashioning their own, so to speak, unified Pakistan identity. Would you say that that's true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You put it very academically sound, that they created this other perceived threat of the other, India, in order to control the masses. And in that, in our order to, in order to uphold the, the grand narrative of Pakistan, right, which was conceived during the partition, they sort of obliterated the rest of the regional cultures and the language and the manner. And this pattern of, sort of control and, the state machinery is intact till date, because like I told you, the regional minorities, which are Pakhtuns and the Baloch, they have a lot of, sort of variances against state, because Pakistani state till they don't find strength in their diversity. They are just trying to create this, and again, I would like to add this, that why we are talking about that military, because military is the main player in Pakistan. They call the shots. Military has the de facto veto power of Pakistani politics till date. And the military is the continuation of the British colonial army, right? There are very few reforms which came after the partition. They have their Kents and they have their own, style of controlling the masses. They have, and they are, there are so many people still in Pakistan, the youth who are charged and who are against India, and they pose India as their enemy, and they could do anything to save Pakistan and to save the Muslim army, which is Pakistani army, which they pose, but they are not. They are not fighting the Muslim. They are not fighting for the Muslims. They are fighting for their own interest too, because they have a lot of corporate interest attached to Pakistani military as well, because they own the largest corporations in Pakistan as well.
Okay.
In Pakistan. So yes, you're absolutely right. They created this other. They created this perceived threat in order to control the masses.
Okay. So what does Turkey have to do with all of this with regards to Pakistani identity? Because that came out of left field. I was like, I'm pretty sure Turkey's not near Pakistan, but I went on Google and I was like, just in case I'm missing something. I'm like, nope, definitely not near Pakistan.
All right. I think that's really funny as well, because, one reason why Pakistani, relates so much to the Turkish because of their Muslim.
And the Ottoman Empire, correct?
Yeah, Ottoman Empire. And, and another reason, that one interesting pattern which I observed, that, the Turkish soap operas, the disease Even Fatima Bhutto, who's a very famous Pakistani writer, she even wrote a book that how these Turkish soap operas are taking the world. And particularly in Pakistan, they are very famous because those few of those, Ertugrul Ghazi, one famous, drama, which everyone watched in my family, my sisters. I have not watched it, by the way, but it's very interesting drama. It talks about the Muslim history, right? Okay. And that is exactly, because the Pakistani state, like I told you, that Pakistani state was not successful in creating a unified identity for the Pakistani people, right? Okay. We have taken chunks from Saudi, we have taken chunks from West, we have taken chunks from India, and then we have an Indus Valley civilization here as well, where, the late Vedic religion was also, sort of seen in this territory, right? In this Valley civilization. So, like I said, that Pakistan has not an identity of itself. So it tries to, find their identities or find their ties sometimes with Saudi and sometimes with Turkish and sometimes with the West. So those Pakistani, there's a lot of fever going on amongst the Pakistani public to watch the Turkish dramas because they talk about the Muslim history, which is sort of missing from the Pakistani content, by the way. Pakistani, state narrative is a lot more, you can say they are very sort of, they don't talk about the Muslim identity, the entertainment industry. So they find the Muslim ties with the Turkish dramas and these disease and soap operas.
Because from what you'd sent me, it seemed like these soap operas are basically approved by the government because they provide a narrative of history that is considered appropriate for the masses. Is that right?
Absolutely. Our former Prime Minister Imran Khan, he officially, I think he started, gave instructions to the Pakistan, the Pakistani state-owned television to air these sort of a Turkish dramas, which are talking about the Muslim history, right? Mm. So, absolutely, you're right. It is, again, propagated by state as well. But again, like I said, that when you're not going to accept the diversity in your own region, Pakistan, and then you're going to find your sort of ties with the rest of the countries like Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and it is not going to work productively, it is not going to prove to be something beneficial for the Pakistanis so it will always have a very shallow effect on the Pakistanis
because it's almost like they're, how do I put this? Trying to find their idea of truth through somebody else's lens.
Absolutely. So I think the Muslim identity, it has it's another debate for some other time. But the Pakistani state, like you asked a question that where do Pakistan find itself in the international arena? So the Pakistani state, in order to stick to its original plan of, monolithic identity, the idea on the basis of which Pakistan was conceived, they are still trying to, stick to that idea, no matter that idea is destroying Pakistan's identity.
And if we could just take all this information and think about how it relates to the theme of the series, what voices would you say have been lost as a result of Pakistan's identity crisis, and how can they be reclaimed?
Like I said, that there's so much beauty to the regional culture and languages. There are so many scripts which are written in Punjabi, in Sindhi. Those voices, the regional voices, are completely lost.
Gosh.
Somewhere between the state-imposed narrative of this monolithic identity of one religion, one language, one culture, the regional beauty is lost.
Mm-hmm.
And when a language is lost, a culture is lost. When you
I
lose
agree.
the language, the whole culture is destroyed.
Mm.
So, like I said, that I'm trying to, I'm writing pieces for the Brown History newsletter, which I'll share with you as well. And I'm trying to write from my own experience, which I had living with my grandmother in my village. We are trying to, now the generation, they are trying to reclaim their representation. And like I said in the start, that this sort of a identity which was imposed upon me by the Pakistani state, and then the colonial identity as well, which was imposed to me by the British, it did not save me. Every time I'm stuck, I go back to my village. I go back to my grandmother, because that identity, which was quite multi-diverse, which taught me to be tolerant towards other religions and other cultures, that saves me at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't get it. I even tried to write for SOAS newsletter as well about this, that about time that Pakistani state should find strength in the diversity instead of trying to completely blur the regional languages. They should sort of find they should start working towards bringing these diverse regional languages into the state state mode of
Preservation, maybe.
absolutely. But there's no, I think there are many, there are such individual people who are sort of working towards preserving their culture and their languages. But on the state level, one thing they do is that they sprinkle the culturally diverse people here and there, and they just produce the music videos, and that's it. There's a Coke studio going
on. Almost like a tourism approach rather than a practical or realistic one.
Exactly. They try to, through music, things are changing. And through, music, people are bringing, but that's it. It's just pertain to the music. On the state level, like I said, that, English is the language, and then Urdu is the official language of Pakistan. And, when you look at the world, in Canada and New Zealand, there are many official languages.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know Pakistan state is, and this is exactly one of the reasons as well that Pakistan is becoming internally very weak, because they couldn't find strength in their diversity. They couldn't cater the regional differences.
That's a really interesting point. I really, really like that we're talking about this. And I would imagine that there are a lot of listeners out there who could relate this to their own backgrounds and their own sense of self and how they fit in the bigger picture, not only within their own communities, but their own countries and worldwide. But I have to say, for now, that's it from us at Coffee and Cocktails with your host, Dr. Ann Wand. I'd like to thank Sonia again for joining us at the studio this afternoon. Additional information on today's topic will be available on our website in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this series and would like to check out our bonus content, then consider becoming a patron starting at £1 per month. It's support from our patrons that really helps to keep the show going. By becoming a patron, you get access to extra bonus content, patron-only interviews, panels, workshops, and much more. To join, just head over to patreon.com/Coffee and Cocktails Podcast. Otherwise, that's it for now. Thanks for listening and have a great week.